The Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart, often called the Josephites or Brown Joeys, were founded in Penola, South Australia, in 1866 by Mary MacKillop and the Rev.Julian Tenison Woods. Members of the congregation use the postnominal initials RSJ. The centre of the congregation is at Mary MacKillop Place, Mount Street, North Sydney, New South Wales, where Saint Mary MacKillop's tomb is enshrined in the Mary MacKillop Memorial Chapel. At present there are around 850 sisters living and working throughout Australia and New Zealand, as well as Ireland and Peru. The sisters of the congregation have Mary MacKillop Centres at Penola, South Australia, Kensington, South Australia, East Melbourne, Victoria, Annerley, Queensland, South Perth, Western Australia, and the main centre mentioned above, at North Sydney. The Australian-New Zealand Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph includes congregations in Perthville and Lochinvar in New South Wales. History. Founding of School and Religious Institute. F.R. Woods had been very concerned about the lack of education, particularly Catholic education, in South Australia. In 1866, he invited MacKillop and her sisters Annie and Lexi to come to Penola and open a Catholic school. Woods was appointed Director of Education and became the founder, along with MacKillop, of a school they opened in a stable there. After renovations by the brother, the MacKillops started teaching more than 50 children. At this time MacKillop made a declaration of her dedication to God and began wearing black. In 1867 MacKillop became the first member and Superior General of the newly formed religious congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart, and moved to a new convent in Grove Street, Adelaide. In the same year, at age 25, she adopted the religious name Sister Mary of the Cross. In Adelaide they founded a new school at the request of the Bishop, Lawrence Bonaventure Shiloh FM, dedicated to the education of the children of the poor. It was the first religious institute to be founded by an Australian. The rule of life developed by Woods and MacKillop for the convent emphasized poverty, a dependence on divine providence, no ownership of personal belongings, and faith that God would provide and willingness to go where needed. The rules were approved by Shiloh. By the end of 1867, 10 other women had joined the Josephites, who had adopted a plain brown religious habit. In consequence, the Josephite sisters became colloquially known as the Brown Joeys. Expansion of the Josephites in an attempt to provide education to all the poor, particularly in country areas. A school was opened at Yankalilla, South Australia, in October 1867. By the end of 1869, more than 70 Josephite sisters were educating children at 21 schools in Adelaide and the country. MacKillop and her Josephites were also involved with an orphanage, neglected children, girls in danger, the aged poor, a reformatory, a home for the aged and incurably ill. In December 1869, MacKillop and several other sisters travelled to Brisbane to establish the congregation in Queensland. They were based at Kangaroo Point and took the Ferrier Road across the Brisbane River to attend Mass at Old St. Stephen's Cathedral. 2 years later, she was in Port Augusta, South Australia, for the same purpose. The Josephite congregation expanded rapidly, and by 1871, 130 sisters were working in more than 40 schools and charitable institutions across South Australia and Queensland. After the acquisition of the Mother House at Kensington in 1872, MacKillop made preparations to leave for Rome to have the rule of the Sisters of St. Joseph approved by the Holy See. MacKillop travelled to Rome in 1873 and was encouraged in her work by Pope Pius IX. The authorities in Rome made changes to the way Josephites lived in poverty, declared that the Superior General and her council were the authorities in charge of the institute, and assured MacKillop that the congregation and the rule of life would receive final approval after a trial period. The resulting alterations to the rule caused a breach between MacKillop and Woods, who felt that the revised rule compromised the ideal of vowed poverty and blamed MacKillop for not getting the rule accepted in its original form. Before Woods' death on 7 October 1889, he and MacKillop were personally reconciled, but he did not renew his involvement with the congregation. The sisters split, with Woods' branch becoming known as the Black Josephites, for the black habits, while MacKillop's sisters donned brown habits and were thus known as the Brown Josephites. While in Europe, MacKillop traveled widely to observe educational methods. During this period, the Josephites expanded their operations into New South Wales and New Zealand. MacKillop relocated to Sydney in 1883 on the instruction of Bishop Reynolds of Adelaide. When she returned in January 1875, after an absence of nearly 2 years, she brought approval from Rome for her sisters and the work they did, materials for her school, books for the convent library, several priests and most of all, 15 new Josephites from Ireland. Regardless of her success, she still had to contend with the opposition of priests and several bishops. This did not change after her unanimous election as Superior General in March 1875. The Josephites were unique among Catholic Church ministries in 2 ways. Firstly, the sisters lived in the community rather than in convents. Secondly, the congregation's constitution required administration by a superior general rather than being subject to the local bishop, a situation unique in its day. This structure resulted in the institute being forced to leave Bathurst in 1876 and Queensland by 1880 due to the respective bishops' refusal to accept this administrative structure. Notwithstanding all the trouble, the institute expanded. By 1877, it operated more than 40 schools in and around Adelaide, with many others in Queensland and New South Wales. With the help from Benson, Bar Smith, the Baker family, Emmanuel Solomon and other non-Catholics, the Josephites, with MacKillop as the Superior General, were able to continue the religious and other good works, including visiting prisoners in jail. After the death in 1883, Sydney's Archbishop Roger Vaughan was succeeded by Patrick Francis Moran, although he had a somewhat positive outlook toward the Josephites. He removed MacKillop's Mother General and replaced her with Sister Bernard Walsh. Pope Leo XIII made the Josephites into a religious congregation of pontifical right in 1885, with its headquarters in Sydney. He gave the final approval to the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart in 1888. Although still living through arms, the Josephite sisters had been very successful. In South Australia, they had schools in many country towns including Wollonga, Willacra, Yarcow, Montaro, Auburn, Jamestown, Laura, Seven Hill, Quorn, Spalding, Georgetown, Robe, Pekina and Apilla. MacKillop continued her work for the Josephites in Sydney and tried to provide as much support as possible for those in South Australia. In 1883, the institute was successfully established at Temuka in New Zealand, where MacKillop stayed for over a year. In 1889, it was also established in the Australian state of Victoria. During all these years, MacKillop assisted Mother Bernard with the management of the Sisters of St. Joseph. She wrote letters of support, advice and encouragement just to keep in touch. By 1896, MacKillop was back in South Australia visiting fellow sisters in Port Augusta, Burra, Pekina, Kapunda, Jamestown and Gladstone. The same year, she travelled again to New Zealand, spending several months in Port Chalmers and Arrowtown in Otago. During her time in New Zealand, the Sisters of St. Joseph, a school, were established in the South Island. In 1897, Bishop Maher of Port Augusta arranged for the Sisters of St. Joseph to take charge of the St. Anacultus Catholic Day School in Petersburg. MacKillop founded a convent and base for the Sisters of St. Joseph in Petersburg on 16 January 1897. On January 16, 1897, the founder of the Sisters of St. Joseph at the Sacred Heart, Mother Mary of the Cross, arrived in Petersburg to take over the school. She was accompanied by Sister Benedzi, Sister M. Joseph, Sister Clotilde and Sister Aloysius Joseph. They were met at the station by Rev. Father Norton, who took them to the newly blessed convent purchased for them on Railway Terrace. The property at 40 Railway Terrace is identified as the convent by a plaque placed by the Diocese of Peterborough. After the death of Mother Bernard, MacKillop was once more elected unopposed to Superior General in 1899, a position she held until her own death. During the later years of her life she had many problems with her health which continued to deteriorate. She suffered from rheumatism and after a stroke in Auckland, New Zealand, in 1902, became paralyzed on her right side. For 7 years, she had to rely on a wheelchair to move around, but her speech and mind were as good as ever and her letter writing had continued unabated after she learned to write with her left hand. Even after suffering the stroke, the Josephite sisters had enough confidence in her to re-elect her in 1905. MacKillop died on 8 August 1909 in the Josephite convent in North Sydney. The Archbishop of Sydney, Cardinal Moran, stated that, "I consider this day to have assisted at the deathbed of a saint." Quote, she was laid to rest at the Gore Hill Cemetery, a few kilometers up the Pacific Highway from North Sydney. After MacKillop's burial, people continually took earth from around her grave. As a result, her remains were exhumed and transferred on 27 January 1914 to a vault before the altar of the Virgin Mary in the newly built Memorial Chapel in Mount Street, Sydney. The vault was a gift of Joanna Barr Smith, a lifelong friend and admiring Presbyterian. After Mary MacKillop, the wide network of schools and community aid organizations established by the sisters continued to expand throughout Australasia and elsewhere. During the 20th century, while vocations within Australia suffered along with other religious institutes in the latter 20th century, its work continued and global recognition came with the canonization of Mary MacKillop in 2010. Since 1979, the congregations of St. Joseph, made up of all the Sisters of St. Joseph and Associates throughout the world, have had a presence at the United Nations as a non-governmental organization. In 1999, the congregations of St. Joseph gained accreditation with the Economic and Social Council at the United Nations, allowing them access to other UN programs and agencies. As an NGO, its focus is poverty, empowering women and children, ecology, environment and immigrants. The number of sisters teaching in schools and vocations in general have declined in Australia. However, the congregation has incorporated works meeting the needs of today, including the Mary MacKillop Foundation, small life-changing projects in Australia, Mary MacKillop International, community development projects in Timor-Leste, Peru and Brazil, includes a fair trade company, Ethica Accessories, in Australia. Good grief education programs for grief and loss. Current commitments include assisting people recover from natural disasters. The program is now in Indigenous languages. St. Anthony's Family Care, caring for families and children. MacKillop Community Rural Services, serving people in rural New South Wales. The work of the sisters continues among the thousands of lay people who lead and serve in the ministries and direct the focus through being directors of the boards of the Incorporated Works Community Work. One organization which has emerged among lay people is Josephite Community Aid. It was formed in 1986 to support young lay people being involved in community work with refugees and others, and a range of other volunteer programs. Mary MacKillop Centers were established as focal points for pilgrimage, learning and spirituality. By the end of the first decade of the 21st century, the Josephites reported around 850 sisters involved in ministering throughout Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Peru, East Timor, Scotland and Brazil. The sisters maintained an interest in working in education, aged care, ministry in rural areas, work with Indigenous Australians, refugees, families, the homeless and general pastoral and parish ministries. The South Australian Province Reconciliation Circle, comprising a group of Josephite and Carmelite women together with Aboriginal mentors, began meeting regularly in 2003 to work for justice and reconciliation in Indigenous affairs. In 2006, the Conference of Josephite Leaders established the Josephite Justice Office to conduct advocacy in the community. Between 2012 and 2014, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Tasmania, Goulburn, Wanganui and the Perthville congregation have all merged as with the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart. Canonization of Mary MacKillop. In 1925, the congregational leader of the Sisters of St. Joseph, Mother Lawrence, began the process to have MacKillop declared a saint, and Michael Kelly, Archbishop of Sydney, established a tribunal to carry the process forward. After further investigations, MacKillop's heroic virtue was declared in 1992. Her canonization was announced on the 19th of February 2010 and subsequently took place on the 17th of October 2010. This made her the first Australian saint. An estimated 8,000 Australians were present in Vatican City to witness the ceremony. Irene Mccormick. Senior Irene Mccormick RSJ was an Australian member of the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart who worked as a missionary in Peru. She was executed there in 1991 by members of Sendero Luminoso, a Maoist rebel guerrilla organisation. In October 2010, Australian media reported McCormack's possible recognised sainthood after Mary MacKillop's canonization. The Daily Telegraph reported that senior Peruvian and Australian Catholic clergy expected preparing a submission to the Vatican for McCormack's cause after Mary MacKillop's canonization. The congregational leader of the Sisters of St. Joseph, Sister Anne Irwin, said that people in Wizawazi, who already regarding McCormack as a saint, demanded this. It also reported that people judged to have been martyrs do not require evidence of miracles performed through their intercession, hoping that this would accelerate McCormack's cause.